Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Community and Infrastructure Services Committee meeting. People interested in participating in committee meetings can register online using the delegation registration form at www.kitchener.ca/delegation or via email at delegation@kitchener.ca. Please refer to the delegation section on the agenda for the electronic participation deadline. Written comments received will be circulated prior to the meeting and will form part of the public record. The meeting live stream and archive videos are available at www.kitchener.ca/watchnow. Accessible formats and communication supports are available upon request. Are there any members of the committee that wish to declare any pecuniary interest regarding matters listed on the agenda? Seeing none. Are there any members of the committee that have questions or wish to discuss any of the consent items on the agenda? Seeing none. Okay, we'll move to a vote on this then. Thank you, Councillor Davey, for moving that. And all those in favor? Thank you, and that passes unanimously. Okay, we will move to 5.1, discussion items and updates to the public tree bylaw, INS 2025-190. And Hajnal Kovacs, our forestry project manager, will provide a 5-minute presentation on this matter. And please go ahead when you're ready.
Oh, are we good now? Thank you. This evening I bring to you our public tree bylaw that was an existing bylaw. It applies to city-owned trees on city land, and it is a part of our municipal chapter 690. So tonight's report is to repeal and replace it with the proposed attachment in your report. I'm not sure if this clicker is working. There we go. So a little introduction of how we got here. Can you just make the next slide? Thank you. In 2022, Council endorsed our tree canopy target that you're all familiar with of 30% in each ward by 2050, and our 2070 goal of 33% across our city. For the following years, we had a lot of research and staff identified ways to enhance the tree conservation in our city to better support those canopy targets for 2050 and 2070. There was also some staffing gap in that time. In late 2024, we engaged a lot of our teams internally as well as our municipality. We talked with our departments, external experts, had them review the documents that are part of the report today, and we surveyed the community through the Engage platform in October. In 2025, today I bring to you the recommendation to repeal and replace that bylaw with the proposed text, and I'll highlight some of the major changes that can be found in that report. Next slide. So the major changes as outlined in the attachments, the first one being the strengthening of the tree protection measures and specifications for our existing city-owned trees. So this includes how we work around our trees for construction and things like that, and the specifications for how to install tree protection fencing, for example. The new bylaw also would grant authority to issue orders. It helps regulate plantable spaces, so not just city-owned trees on city property, but the land where we could also plant future city-owned trees as well. It also updates the tree planting specifications that we've already been applying over the last couple of months to make sure we have the highest standard and quality of trees being planted on city-owned land. Next slide. The updates also include a new improved public tree removal and compensation program, so a lot more formalized than what we had in the past, significantly higher standards. The compensation would be applicable if there's the approved removal of a city-owned tree by our staff. The compensation is now scaled to the size of the tree being removed. It's not a one-to-one replacement, and the replacement does not reflect the tree market value of the specific tree, rather the size of the tree being removed. There are cash in lieu options outlined as well. These options cover the establishment of the new trees, so it's not just purchase and replanting, but also the first 2 years of maintenance to water for that young tree. So as an example, a new amenity tree costs $1,800 for those first 2 years. So in an example of someone removing a 20 to 40 centimeter tree on public land, a compensation requirement from our team would be to require 3 new compensation trees. They're about 5 centimeters in diameter for comparison. And so if that can't be adjusted into the plans to replant on-site, a compensation cash in lieu is $5,400 in that example. Next slide. And finally, updated tree-related fines would be a good accompany for this updated bylaw, as would be the Schedule A in the AMPS bylaw that we already have in place. There's already 9 tree-related infractions in that bylaw, so we're looking to increase some of those penalties and add 4 new additional infractions as well. Next slide. And so in summary, regulating what we have is clearly our best path forward in achieving our canopy goal for 2050 and 2070. An improved public tree bylaw will help bring clarity to our residents. Simple things like improving definitions has been a big improvement. It strengthens our compliance and helps support an overall healthier urban forest, especially with how we work around our existing trees. And pending council approval, staff will implement the new bylaw as soon as possible with an educational plan, enforcement, and monitoring as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and we do have some questions of staff. And go ahead, Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. Thank you, Heine, for that. Just wondering, how does this apply to new developments where trees need to be removed?
There we go. Through you, Madam Chair.
Oops.
Is that where, there we go. Through you, Madam Chair, this would only apply on public land where the proponent would need to remove a city-owned tree to achieve their project. And so there might be some situations where a development application might also be affected by the public tree bylaw, but typically the tree management policy is what's going to be affecting those projects.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for this report. Will the 30% tree canopy continue this as is by 2050? That's not being modified, right? The
Through you,
goal-
Madam Chair. No, the goal is not being modified.
Okay.
That's still going to be the same, yes. Hopefully we'll get there even sooner.
Right, okay. I was contacted by a resident recently asking if trees being removed on city property adhere to the Migratory Bird Act. And I just wondered if you could speak to that.
Yeah, great question. So when our staff do approve a removal for tree, if it's hazard and risk related, it'll take place at any point in time. They will survey for things like bird nests, but if there's a hazard, they're going to get that tree out of that location as soon as possible. When it comes to things like maintenance pruning, so not a hazard, but maybe some low-hanging branches that would be a nuisance to like someone walking by, for example, those would be a bit lower risk. And if it could be a non-disruptive pruning exercise, our contractors and our internal staff would complete that work. But if there was an active bird nest in the tree and it's safe to leave that tree alone for the bird breeding window, then the contractors and our staff have been leaving the trees alone and coming back after October.
And what about snags?
So snag specifically would be in like woodlots or natural areas. So the only time that we would flag that for removal would be as if it's within striking distance to our trails or a property boundary. If there was a standing asset, like a house near a property boundary, and there was a snag that could potentially damage the home, then we would flag that for removal. But typically snags were being left because they're away from the property boundaries.
Okay. Also, another question that's been asked of me is, what are the main causes of damage or loss of trees on public property besides natural causes?
Yeah, I mean, through you, Madam Chair, I think the biggest cause of tree loss lately has been some of our younger trees having a hard time establishing depending where they're being planted. So picking the right tree for the right place has been the biggest task our team is taking to make sure the trees do make it past those first 2 years. It's also why we took the watering program in-house as of last year. So now all the watering is done by our seasonal staff as well, as opposed to relying on the contractors. So beyond site conditions or salt stress, things like that, the urban environment is not super kind to our young trees. I think it's mostly just environmental conditions. Did you want to add anything to that?
The only thing I would add as well is just pressures related to changes in property size. So the driveway applications, driveway widening is impacting or has an impact on city-owned trees and private projects. So we try to work with people in the community to have their project proceed in a way that's not going to impact the city tree. So that's our ultimate goal, but we are seeing a fair amount of requests to extend driveways and expand properties that impacts the private side of that
Right.
location.
Okay, thank you. Another question I have is regarding it's found on page 3 of the report, where it states that while an entire new tree permitting system was not pursued at this time, and it goes on from there. The question is, what is the current tree permitting system, and what considerations would be looked at in a new system, if a new system were to be introduced? Like, why are we not having that new system now, and what's the difference between the two?
Through you, Madam Chair, I can start the answer to that question. So we tried to look into other neighboring municipalities who have a fee-for-permit service for their trees. We didn't hear the best reviews from them, frankly. So at this time, we didn't find the benefit of having a permitting system would give us what we're looking for in this program. Right now, the permitting system that we have would be a matter of consultation with staff to get the approvals, written approvals, usually through email and things like that for an agreement of the removal. Did you want to add to that?
Sure. All I would add to that is currently our permitting system applies to private trees on private lands at a certain size of property, so over an acre, whereas individual public trees with 70,000 trees, permitting is not, it's, as Heine alluded, not the most effective mechanism or measure for us to protect public trees. We'd rather work with the community, have their general awareness high enough that they know if they're working around a private tree, they need to engage with staff or follow content that we can develop for them so they know the rules and all the regulations. So permitting wasn't deemed to be an efficient or an effective mechanism for public trees.
Okay. And you mentioned private trees. Will that be coming back to council at some point, the removal of trees on properties smaller than 1 hectare?
Yeah, so we have some plans for later in this calendar year to come back to committee and council with some reports on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman. Councillor Deneau.
Thank you, Chair Johnston, and thank you, Ms. Kovacs, for this presentation, and nice to see Josh and Jeff. It was only a few hours we were talking about trees today. So what is the fine for removing a tree on city land?
Great question. I'm just checking the attachment here for attachment A through you, Madam Chair. Just got to find which attachment it was. Pardon me for not memorizing
That's
them.
okay. No.
There are 12 infractions on here, but I believe it was $1,500 for your first
Yes.
infraction.
Okay, so
And
that,
then-
yeah. So
Yeah.
my question is, as in this morning, we met at a home or a vacant lot. What prevents somebody from just taking the tree down and paying the reduced penalty as opposed to replacing the tree as is indicated in our discussion this morning?
Yeah, so I mean, when it comes to these AMPs, like administrative fines, there would have to be evidence of the person cutting that tree down to be able to be fined in the act of doing so. If we have evidence that we can prove the person is the one responsible for removing the tree, we could potentially prosecute them through legal matters through the court system if we deem necessary. Maybe if there was multiple trees or the tree loss was significant enough, like one very mature tree, things like that. But you're right, there is potential for a weakness in the way that might seem to be a better option for those who don't want to follow the rules correctly.
Have we had that happen before?
It does happen.
Okay. I definitely don't want to encourage that, but
Yeah, just in terms of, just to further add to a response to your question, the preference and the mechanism of using compensation, is that the compensation is paid back to the team to plant new trees, whereas a fine is simply a mechanism to deter you from doing it again. So there is nothing stopping somebody from doing that. We can't prevent that. We can just react to that. Whereas having a program in place where we have compensation and we have all of the mechanisms of the bylaw is the preventative aspect of it, is what we're looking for.
okay. So, but hypothetically, Ms. Kovacs, what you're saying is we know the person does it. We could, from a legal standpoint, incur more than a $1,500 fine if we.
That's right.
Based
Yes.
on these parameters.
Yeah, I think the text said up to $50,000 could be prosecuted following.
Perfect. That's all I want to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Deneau. Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. and thank you for the report, Ms. Kovats. I guess my question is with regards to, you'd mentioned in your presentation that we've been sort of doing this offhand. So what were we doing before that?
So for the last couple of years, so I've only been with the city for just under 2 years, but for the last couple of years anyways, the fee has usually been a one-to-one compensation of about $650 for the tree to be replanted in the place of the removed tree.
Okay. I guess my second question is, and I guess, because when I look at this policy, and I do like it, and I'm prepared to move it when the time comes, and when it's appropriate, how do we, I would assume we as the municipality are probably the ones that probably take down more trees in our own. So how do we deal with this internally?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, great question. So most of this bylaw will be affecting our internal teams mostly. So things like stormwater projects, park renovations, any of the boulevard alterations we might be doing. And so far, we've been piloting this program with our team for several months now, like since November-ish. And there's been great success and uptake with the teams being responsive, following through with identifying their plans, proposed plans, and working with us to see what compensation they can incorporate into their restoration plans during the project. So there hasn't been any significant roadblocks in so far piloting the project, so we have no concerns continuing to implement with internal teams.
Okay. Because I know when we do events, we charge here and there. I just don't want to, I want to make sure that we don't create further barriers within the organization with dealing with other departments. Anyways, I'm happy to move this, and thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ioannidis, and I will come back to you on that. Thank you. Councillor Davey.
Thank you. Apologies if this was covered. I was distracted for a second, but I had a resident reach out. A number of trees are dying on his street, and I believe he told me that he was quoted at 2 to 5 years for replacement of when trees are on boulevards that die. So I guess my question is, like, number one, is that accurate? Number two, are we prioritizing? As much as, you know, we want trees everywhere, I think we should be prioritizing ones on people's boulevards ahead of, you know, adding to a forest in a park or something like that. So if staff could come on that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. So currently, the service level for the day of a tree is cut down to the day the new tree is planted is typically up to 2 years. And the reason there's that delay is because the day the tree is cut down could be a two-step process. One, the top of the tree might be cut down. At a later time, a different truck comes back to take out the log or the stem of that tree. Then it could take up to 12 months for us to coordinate the stumping of that tree. And then it would be the following growing season that the tree would be planted. So 5 years, I'm hoping, isn't happening anywhere. If that is the case, we're hoping they would contact the call center and let us know that their replacement tree, there has been human error, right? There could be over 2 years that their replacement hasn't taken place. But we are trying to actually reduce our service levels the best we can to under 2 years.
So is that just like an internal target, or is it like a formal standard we try to have it done in 2 years? I'm just curious, like if it's a funding issue, I'm not.
Sure, yeah, through you, Madam Chair. Currently, most of the delays, if you will, to get us to 2 years has been because of the significant ash tree removals that we had to do across the community. So as of last fall's stumping backlog that we call the stumping backlog, we're quite caught up to now being caught up to trees removed up to March of last year. So there's only stumps in the ground from March to current June. So that means that we're caught up to an annual cycle of tree removed, stump removed, that same calendar year if possible, or that same 12-month if possible.
Okay, 2 years sounds reasonable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davey. Councillor Michaud.
Thank you. There was a mention here a few minutes ago with regards to private property and taking trees down. I'm trying to find it in here. Can you give me kind of an, it's not in here?
Through you, Madam Chair, the report did not mention anything about it. I think the comment might be relating to the private tree bylaw that will be coming back to council later this year.
Okay.
Perhaps.
I'll wait for that then. Okay.
Yeah, nothing in
So
this
there isn't
report.
one. There isn't one, but there will be.
There is a project team working on that one, so
Great.
there will be updates coming to council later this year.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councillor Michaud. Councillor Stretch.
Yes, thank you. I was curious about, what kind of reasons are we seeing? So I'm hearing that there's internal reasons that we cut down trees, and there's obviously natural reasons why trees need to come down. But what is the leading reason why trees come down on public property?
On public property? Through you, Madam Chair, most of the removals that we do by, I guess, our day-to-day work is risk-related. So a tree is past a certain point of decline where it will not be able to recover and remain a healthy tree on that road. So we'll do maintenance to help reduce a tree size to see if it'll rebound. Once it's reached a certain point of, let's say, 70% mortality in the upper part, that tree is usually flagged for removal. So that's going to be our removals, is that the majority of the tree is no longer living or going to be safe to have on the boulevard. And then we have a lot of younger trees, like below the 20-meter size, that are being flagged for removal as well, if they're not having success establishing. Perhaps they had physical damage from things like snow blowers or possibly too much road salt or sidewalk salt, that kind of gets pounded onto the same smaller area on the boulevard. So, I mean, although you can't 100% diagnose the cause of that death of that tree, the compounding effects of some of those urban pressures are smaller trees and then the very large trees that have reached their life capacity.
Okay, so those reasons then would be permanent reasons for removal.
Permanent reasons for?
Like permit?
Oh, permit reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah, so through you, Madam Chair, if the city is removing a tree for a hazard reason, it would just be a matter of getting it down as soon as possible. If it's a young tree that's being removed because it has died due to causes that we are unaware, whatever that might have been, let's say it was pressures we just talked about, we would remove that tree and replant it as soon as possible as well. So neither of those cases would flag our compensation program for our internal staff. It would be more so the standing living trees that someone wants to move to create something in its place. So it's those situations where the tree is not flagged for removal for health or hazard or that kind of situation.
Great. And my next question is about different neighborhoods. So some of the older neighborhoods with quite established tree canopies versus new neighborhoods. And so is there, does this plan like fully encompass both areas in rejuvenating the tree canopy evenly? Or is it more focused on the newer neighborhoods?
Through you, Madam Chair, this plan is specifically to compensate for any approved removals. So if there was, say, a mature neighborhood where the compensation could not be replanted, we would take that a cash in lieu compensation and put it into our neighborhoods that are flagged for low tree canopy target. And we do have 16 communities, planning communities flagged as such. So those would be our top priorities to put new trees into.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Stretch. Councillor Singh.
Yeah, I'll just start off with complimenting staff. I think the fact that we have changes towards a private tree canopy bylaw, it's good that we're internally looking beforehand and showing best practices for ourselves before we place higher order responsibility on private landowners who have trees. So good on you for staff. So I like the overall direction that it's heading. I think Councillor Davey touched on the same concern I had about ongoing concerns that we hear from residents about a tree that's been cut down for various different reasons and the length of time it takes for replanting. I hear the 2 years. Is there a reason why the stumping and the removal can't happen simultaneously?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, I can start that answer. For the last couple of years, it's been mostly, we'll call it a backlog of number of removals and just the sheer cost of stumping a tree. It can be hundreds of dollars more than putting the new tree in the ground. So just to remain within our budgets of maintaining trees, stumping trees, and planting new trees, we have to kind of prioritize our numbers within those groups. With that said, with the backlog that we cleaned up last year, this calendar year, we're looking at a lot faster turnaround time from the day of removal to stumping. This spring, when we issue our large work orders for stumping to contractors, we're going to be catching up on all the stumps from last calendar year, from March to pretty well June this year. And then so this fall, we're hoping to replant a lot of those trees, which means some of those homes might get their replanting within a year.
No, that's good. And I'm sorry, I'm continuing to push it on. I'm looking at in the past where I've had to, have a tree cut on private land, and they're not doing it. They're not having it cut down, and they come back after a year to stump it. It's all one contractor that comes in, cuts the trees, and stumps it immediately. Is there not an efficiency, the fact that we have staff there, that we can coordinate both those things at the same time, as opposed to having two crews come, or even if it's being contracted to facilitate a different timeline?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, the biggest hindrance in that ask is that the stumping requires locates, which can take like 5 to 8 weeks, depending on what utilities are nearby, whereas the call to remove a tree sometimes has to take place within like a 1 to 2 day window, depending on why it's being called to be removed. So there are, let's say, like small trees that aren't a hazard that are dying due to environmental conditions. Those we have been looking at some programs internally to see how can we bulk the removal of all of our young trees in the same time. And then you have to still wait your 2 months to get those locates, so you have to coordinate. Our tree removal contractors do have the ability to do the stumping as well as with our new tender that they've applied for, their RFSQ. With that said, that locates time window is somewhat up in the air, so there's been more of an interest to say, do the removals, let them pile up, and then we submit 300 stumps for locates, and then those can be done when all the locates come in, and then that's your first order of business for planting the following season.
Okay, so with the locates, usually for fences, it doesn't take that long. I guess it could be a different process. This is something, maybe a conversation I'll take offline, that how we can possibly coordinate all of it, especially when we're doing a lieu of trees in a particular neighborhood. And it's already a scheduled work as opposed to reacting more in emergency, so I get that part. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. The only, the other way I think to look at this is we plant seasonally, so spring and fall, so we have 2 windows to plant trees. So even though we can clean out all the stumps and get everything ready, we have limited capacity in budget to plant. So we have to allocate the money we have each year to plant the trees that are in that queue. And so timeline shortening, to Heina's point, we have contractor programs that we've more recently introduced where we have more availability of contractors. So we can look at getting the stump out quicker, and then that shortens the window to get the tree planted in the next year. But it's all dependent on prioritization and budget.
And I get that, and I'm supportive that we shouldn't necessarily increase our budget unnecessarily, but at the same time, I'm looking at more efficiency as opposed to increasing the budget to meet that need. I would say it's more of a comment, but wherever we can partner, if you know that we do have budget constraints, but there's just some level of ownership and pride that residents have, and they'll come out and be like, sure, if I can partner with the city and get that tree planted faster, they're willing to, come up with, what are the funds may be required. Are we considering having that conversations with residents? And that's my last question. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. The opportunity to partner, certainly. I think in these kind of respects, though, it's not, it's technical work and involves machinery and equipment and various things like that. So there's limited abilities for people to get involved to help with these aspects. We're certainly partnering and have a very strong partnership with REAP to help encourage residents to do what they can do on their property in terms of planting trees in their own space. And so that's our biggest opportunity to increase canopy citywide, is to get people planting on their personal private properties. And they have the ability and the immediate control in that to do that. So we subsidize those programs through financial relationships and partnerships with REAP, and that's the biggest opportunity for people to get involved right now.
Thank you, Councillor Singh. Councillor Janelle.
Thank you, Chair Johnston. How often, when we approve a tree removal, are we able to preserve that tree and move it to another location?
Through you, Madam Chair, in my time, I have yet to see that happen. I'm not sure if you've seen that in a park setting. Perhaps if it was an open park area and the tree was under a certain size, that could be an entertained ability to move the tree. A boulevard tree grows under pretty unique conditions underground. I don't think it would be a right candidate size to get that caliper removal machine into the boulevard without damaging the sidewalk and the curb, back of curb as well. So in a park setting, we could start experimenting with that. Those machines are pretty expensive to set up, and your survival is not necessarily great either. If it was like a culturally important tree or some sort of, sentimental tree, it could be explored, but we have yet to find the need to try that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Janelle, and seeing no one else in the queue, I'll just ask my questions as well. First of all, I would also like to thank you for your report, and like Councillor Singh said, I think it is really important for us to take a look internally before we move on to the private tree bylaw. So I think this is a really great report. So A few years ago, there was a very important tree in Lakeside Park, which came down, which had to come down during COVID. And the neighbors in the neighborhood were very upset that the tree had come down without any notice to them. So following up from that, I did put forward a motion about our trees of significance in our parks and our public spaces, that residents could nominate a tree and tell a story about why it's important to them and to the community, because trees are so important to our community, as you all know. And Mr. Shea, I know you're very familiar with Lakeside Park in particular, and how people care about the community there. So I'm wondering if that's if it's something that we can do in the future about the trees of significance. One of the things was that people wanted to know if a tree had to come down, was there an ability to put up signage to say, this tree will be coming down imminently. I mean, if it's a dangerous thing and it needs to come down right away, that is one thing. But that is something that they had mentioned about, that they would like that. Or if we do end up taking a tree down, is there an opportunity to put up signage about why it was done, et cetera? So I'll let you answer that. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I have seen that story map of those recognition of those trees. So there's a couple up on the community, and I love the idea of it. I totally agree. You never know what tree is important for someone until they put it up there. In regards to putting up signage in park and natural areas, we can 100% explore that as temporary signage. Even just the lawn H-frame sign could be installed if the removal wasn't risk-related, like you mentioned. So we can definitely look into that with our team. Even if it had to be a prompt removal, I do agree a post, bit of a tombstone sign, if you will, could be a good idea for some folks, just so they know that there was a hazard that might not be obvious, and just to kind of close that loop, not to get them upset when they do see that happen. So I think that's a great idea to explore.
Yeah, that's really great. And I think you said that there's a number of them that people have put there. So I think that's really great. And even if with our public, our information on our public tree bylaw, maybe if we even put a link to that there, because I think that might be where people are going to look for information on that as well. So thanks so much. And Councillor Singh, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to ask this question in the fear that I'll probably get teased by Councillor Ioannidis afterwards, but I'm going to ask anyways. So when we're cutting our own trees, obviously some of these very mature trees have large stumps. And you see sensory play in some parks that do have kind of like large stumps kind of laying on the ground or whatever. Have we considered coordinating with the parks team and seeing whatever those trees can be, remnants can be used as a part of kind of that sensory play within our parks?
That's a great question. Through you, Madam Chair, you're asking specifically to leave some of the stumps as a feature to be added to the park.
Yes.
Yeah, wonderful idea, especially because currently our budget is prioritizing stumps on boulevards to restart those trees. In natural spaces, we have the freedom to move, 4 feet to the right and put a new tree there. I think there is definitely opportunity to leave maybe higher stumps, to leave a chair, things like that for folks.
Yeah.
We can definitely explore that. There's a lot of constraints with like, how does that affect maintenance? What is that going to be the lifespan of before it starts decaying and rotting, and people get worried about bugs or funguses, things like that. But it's a great idea to explore, I think.
But in some cases where we do have that backlog of stumping the tree, that way we can delay in that case longer, obviously not boulevards, but in our natural areas. But I'll leave it in dedicated hands who would probably know better, so.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. In most cases, we do leave the park stumps. We try to get the tree cut as low as possible so it's not a tripping hazard. And then in some cases, we might surface grind them, which is a much shallower, quicker procedure than to actually remove the stumps to 60 centimeters, which is the standard for a replanting hole to be created. So many park stumps are actually being left to help reallocate budget for the boulevards.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Singh. Councillor Deneau.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Johnson. Just a quick comment. After we met this morning, I went over to one of the schools in my ward and had a discussion with 3 grade 5 classes. And one of the questions that came up was, what is the city doing to plant more trees? And so, because of the conversation we had this morning and, because of my knowledge of a tree canopy, I was able to explain, what we're doing as a city to increase our tree canopy. So I just, that just gives a kudos to our staff and to the city for continue to promote trees and the importance of trees in our parks and our boulevards. And so, again, I didn't realize a tree conversation would be like an hour, but, it's important to all of us. And so, again, thanks for all your assistance with our community's trees and planting and tearing down, and keep up the good work.
Thank you, Councillor Donnell. Mr. Mayor.
Thanks very much, and I too will take this opportunity to thank staff, but it was actually Councillor Singh's question that kind of prompted me with a further suggestion, and that might be to actually connect with arts and culture, because maybe there's some opportunities to actually take some of those tree stumps and convert them into pieces of public art.
That'd be awesome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I don't see, does anyone have any comments besides people who have made comments? No? And seeing none. And Councillor Ioannidis, you have.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Johnson. I don't have much to say. I just, I feel like this is a right step in the right direction, just giving a little bit more clarity on how we deal with trees on more of a fair, realistic view, and the one for one. It's difficult when you take down a mature tree and you give it one that's a sapling. Well, maybe not a sapling, but at least we're doing our part as. I feel like we do have a fiduciary responsibility to maintain that our tree canopy, and to make sure we do replace the trees the way they, on a one-to-one comparative measure.
Thank you, Councillor Ioannidis, and you had moved that previously. And all those in favor? And that passes unanimously. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, staff. Okay, and we'll move, and then we have, there's one information item for the committee's review. Are there any members of the committee that wish to discuss the information item? Councillor Chapman?
Actually, I just have a question for clarification. And this is just sort of a reminder. Oh, it's not you. Who do I talk to? Hi. Is there a staff person I should be talking to? Justin? Okay.
Yes.
So the question is regarding the definition of affordable rent, and I know this is an already approved bylaw, but just if you could remind us how affordable rent is defined in this context, and especially when we're talking about tenants who have been displaced and then moved back into a place.
Yeah, our team's just getting set up here, Councillor Chapman. Mr. Van Meer Meese, go ahead.
That's what I'm always define it for you. Every time. President. Through the chair. The definition of affordability is established through, initially through the provincial government, and that's the definition that's in the official plan as well, reflected in the official plan. So we've maintained those affordability figures. I'll have to draw up the specific numbers exactly, but that's for this purpose is the definition of affordability that we use.
And that would mean that if somebody was displaced, they would come back at the affordable rate, or they'd come back at the rate that they were paying before they were displaced?
Through the chair, they would be coming back at the rate that they were paying when they were displaced.
Okay.
We want to maintain kind of the affordability for the individual tenant specifically, so that rent may be substantially lower than our affordable rate.
And what about, I'm thinking now of, for example, the Benton Street development that I forget how many people were going to be displaced there, but if, I noticed they don't appear in the report. And there was the Benton Street, and there was another one that I had sort of identified as not being there, the 111 Hoffman Street. so, first of all, why are they not showing in the report? And second of all, when people are displaced, let's say at the Benton Street development in the townhouses, would all of those units maintain their pre-demolition rents, like in an attempt to save affordable housing, even though there is no resident, like, because some residents may have moved out already before it's actually demolished, right?
Through you, Madam Chair. So in response to the first part of your question regarding the Benton Street property, we have not received a rental replacement permit request application for that property. There was no LT decision on that land use change, and there's been no action on that development since. So we did outline on page 4 of the staff report, which you pointed out, where we've received application, the status, and then we have 6 that we're anticipating.
Yeah, Hoffman Street was one.
Council will remember that this was approved and took effect immediately, and as a result, there were some development applications that were in process, and it's those applications where we've had conversations as they're going through the approval process. We have changed our process, and one of the recommendations is to change our guidelines to streamline and create awareness around this bylaw earlier in the process. So as a result, now through pre-submission process and early in the development review process, we're identifying the need for rental replacement. We don't capture all of that in the report. We only capture the 10 where we're having specific conversations.
So, and regarding the affordable units that are going to be lost, let's say at the Benton Street development, if it comes to that, are all of those units going to be replaced as affordable units at some place somewhere, like maybe hopefully on site, or how does that, or is there no staying power in that way? Unless they're somebody living in the units right now prior to demolition.
So through you, Madam Chair, where a unit is occupied and the tenant meets the criteria, they have one of 3 choices. In the case of a rent payout, then we would replace the unit and we would ensure the affordability of the unit. There are some cases where the unit has been naturally vacant for more than 6 months and the tenant is no longer an applicable tenant under the rental replacement bylaw. So in terms of affordability, it's directly related to the rent that a tenant is currently paying and not to our definition of affordability. So
So it's not connected to the unit itself, it's connected to the resident.
Through you, Madam
Go
Chair,
ahead.
that's correct. If a resident is living in a unit which meets the resident and the unit meets the criteria for the rental replacement bylaw, it is relative to their lease arrangement. So depending on the tenure, there may be 2 units in a building that are both applicable to bylaw, but the current tenant is paying different rent. It would be reflective of their current rent.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions. Okay. Yes, it's, yes, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Davey has moved to adjourn. All those in favor? Thank you. And we're adjourned. Thanks very much.